Good morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. Do you know, I was going to begin the show this morning by saying, I've said it before and I'll say it again. But that wouldn't exactly narrow things down, would it, if you listen on an even vaguely regular basis? So I will resist that urge and simply say it. If they can turn you against firefighters, they can turn you against anybody. And as has been grimly predicted by many, many, many people, it seems to be the turn of GPs and doctors at the moment. No matter that the profession is warning in a report, in a statement by 6 separate medical bodies, that their members are facing a growing tide of abuse from patients. They say that this is the frustration caused by long waits for care that are a direct consequence of political decisions taken over the course of the last 11 years. But you don't need to be Nostradamus to predict that the people who cheered those 11 years of decisions taken over the last 11 years will be at the very front of the queue of those trying to blame doctors for shortages in the NHS. And how quick, I mean, I'll give you 2 headlines, 2 front pages today, which in many ways sum up not just this story and this problem, this issue, but also this country, actually, and the way we are in thrall still to the worst kind of provocations, the invitation just to hate each other all the time. Who are you going to get angry with today, civil servants or doctors? Yeah. Prime Minister's on holiday. Give him a free pass. Actually, I think we probably should resist the urge to get unduly exercised by Boris Johnson's holiday for the very simple reason that I don't think he does much when he's here. And how would you even know that the Prime Minister was on holiday if you hadn't been told by the news that the Prime Minister was on holiday? What would he be doing if he was here? Staying up until burning the candle at both ends, desperately trying to come up with a solution to the looming energy crisis for industry, refereeing the apparent spat between his recently appointed business secretary, who claimed that the Chancellor of the Exchequer was looking at help for businesses, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who let it be known that he was doing nothing of the sort, and sources gave the impression that Kwasi Kwarteng was being accused of lying by the Treasury. And the fellow in charge is on the Costa del Sol. But if he was here, I don't think would things be unraveling, choose your own verb, any differently if Boris Johnson was here, or if he was in, I don't know, Ulaanbaatar. If he was in Outer Mongolia, I don't think that the hand on the tiller would feel any firmer than it does when he's ensconced in his lavishly redecorated Downing Street flat. So, you know, it does break down usually, this sort of story, between people that are still clinging to the notion that he's the Messiah, and those that are persuaded he's a very naughty boy. The former will think it's perfectly reasonable to go on holiday. The latter will think it's absolutely outrageous. The truth, as ever, lies somewhere between the two. But I think in this particular case, it doesn't really matter where he is, does it? Given that his workload is, we are told by those who know, including his most senior former aide, or his former most senior aide, Dominic Cummings, we're told that when he is here, he doesn't do anything. So we'll look instead at the NHS, and these 2 front pages that I referred to a moment ago before getting completely distracted and going off on a tangent sum up the state of the nation. And in many ways, I think governments are held up, aren't they? They're supported, they're sustained by invitations to the citizenry to bite chunks out of each other. What would you do if you were in charge at the moment? Would you want everybody to be looking upstairs saying, what the hell is going on? Or would you want to be looking over the road at the GP who lives at number 17 and go, oi, we might have clapped you last year, but this year we're going to tell you that you've got to work more hours or do something. A fella up there working for the civil service, putting in a shift every day, but in a different building from the one where he normally puts in a shift. Stone him! Stone him! Down with people working in places that I don't think they should be working in, even though I've never dedicated a moment before to working out where it is they actually normally work. Stone him! Doctors, civil servants, who else is on the list today for the invitation to bite a chunk out of each other? I don't know. I've only looked at page 1. So page 1 of one newspaper, just a single GP for every 2,000 patients. No wonder it's so hard to see a doctor in person! ! And how's that going to work, lads? If the actual division of patients by GPs throws up a 2,000 result, how are you going to see GPs more with the same number of GPs? I don't get it. It's possible I'm missing something. And there is inevitably a postcode disparity here. In some areas, the figure is nearly 3,000 patients per GP. And in other areas, in the best provided districts, it's 1,600 patients per GP. But if I stood on a hill and shouted for more appointments, for more patients, without mentioning that we would need more GPs, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stupid would I be? Answer, not very stupid at all, because it works. If they can turn you against firefighters, they can turn you against anybody, including your own family, as we saw during Brexit. And now to another newspaper. NHS waiting lists trigger tide of abuse against staff. It's almost as if the two were directly linked, isn't it? It's almost as if the right-wing media are inviting you to bite chunks out of GPs for being overworked and understaffed are actually inciting the kind of abuse that is now being visited upon NHS staff across the UK, including assaults from patients, which they say it's a joint statement from 6 key medical bodies and staff groups, blaming patients' increasingly long delays in receiving treatment on years of successive governments underinvesting in the NHS and not fixing severe workforce shortages. What was it Chomsky said about what you do if you want to fatten up something for privatisation? You defund it, you demoralise it, you get people to turn against it, and then you carve it up and flog it off. And if you think that is not a possibility in the current context, then I have got a bridge I would like to sell you. So how are we going to do it today? 10 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't need you to tell me how frustrating it must be not to be able to see a doctor when you want to. That's the point, isn't it? This is the difference between proper journalism and tabloid journalism. Tell me how frustrating it is that you can't see a doctor when you want to, and then we'll all sort of implicitly hate on doctors for a while. Forget who we were clapping on Thursday nights in 2020. Let's all just sort of, share stories about how hard it is to see a doctor and then get a little bit angrier so that the next time we see a doctor, we're kind of cross with them already. Because that's really going to help. Obviously, as somebody who routinely exhorted you not to blame the bankers for the international financial crisis caused by bankers in 2008, I am, very embarrassed now to have to admit that possibly it was a mistake to blame it all on librarians and midwives, and to institute a whole raft of cuts across almost every area of public service, which now sees us coming out of the pandemic complaining about the shortages in almost every area of public service. See, the bus drivers, there's a shortage of school bus drivers because they're all going off to drive HGVs. Wherever you look, there's a shortage of people. Now, I'm very lucky. I'm not going to lie to you. I generally like people. So, the idea of getting rid of people was never a logical or very attractive option to me. I always try to judge people by what they do and who they seem to be, rather than by their star sign or their skin colour or the country that they were born in. My opinion of Boris Johnson is not altered one jot by the fact that he wasn't born here. It doesn't change my view of him one iota, for example. Ditto Jacob Rees-Mogg. I don't care where they were born. I'll judge people by their actions. And speaking of J-Dog, 20% discount, wasn't it, in food and drink? That must be a bit late now. Does anyone know what's happened to that? The 20% reduction in the cost of all food and drink that he promised would be a consequence of the B word? I do not know. 12 after 10 is the time. So I know how, because I live it as well. I know how frustrating it is not to be able to see a doctor at the drop of a hat when you want to. I'd quite like to see a doctor myself at the moment. Nothing serious. Don't crack open the Cremant just yet. But it's a right old palaver. I had a phone consultation during the lockdown, and you go online, and I haven't got an online thing, and it says you've got to pop into the surgery to get your online ID, and once you've got your online ID, you can make a phone booking or an online booking, and then if the doctor thinks it's serious enough, then they will have a face-to-face booking, which is not really what I'm after. But still, you've got to go through all of the, and it's a right old pain in the proverbials, isn't it? I mean, genuinely, it's frustrating for two reasons. It feels suboptimal. Why can't I just walk in? I'm sure when I was a kid, rose-tinted spectacle time. We're all guilty of it. Although I won't be waxing lyrical about the Blitz, as Ian Duncan Smith was kind of doing this weekend. I'm pretty sure as a kid, Mum would take us to the doctors. I don't know, obviously, being a kid at the time, whether she'd made phone calls in advance and booked. But I think you could just turn up, give him your name, sit in the waiting room or the Petri dish, as it should perhaps have been known, sit in the waiting room, then the doctor would see you. I remember I needed to get my ears syringed once because I couldn't hear anything. It was really quite crazy. I woke up one morning, couldn't hear a flipping thing. It's a bit like the opening line of Cider with Rosie, is it, by Laurie Lee, when he wakes up and his eyes are glued shut with sleep. He thinks he's lost his eyesight overnight. I woke up, I thought I'd lost my hearing. Mum takes me down the thing, they remove a ball of wax. Sorry if you're having your breakfast. Size of a Malteser it was. Absolute shocker. But I think we just turned up. So that's reason number one why it's frustrating, is the good old days. This isn't how we are used to doing things. I don't like change, especially when change does feel to be measurably inferior to how it was before. But you know what? We didn't have computers. We didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have all of the stuff that we've got now in the good old days. So maybe the new best will be something that accommodates all of the technology that's been developed since 1978, when I had my ears syringed in the doctor's surgery round the corner from where the roller disco used to be, up near where the leisure centre used to be in Kidderminster. Maybe they can do things differently. So that's frustration number one, because we just feel things could be better. Frustration number two is actually born of fear, I think. It's actually born of the stories that are now being very deliberately seeded. Inevitable stories made worse by 11 years of political decision-making and, of course, by that decision to impose economic sanctions on ourselves and decimate the workforce in 2016. But, of course, all of the people in the media and in politics who encouraged us to impose economic sanctions on ourselves and decimate the workforce back in 2016 will not be standing up and going, all right, my bad, sorry, mea culpa, think I might have called that wrong. Maybe we should have blamed the bankers and not librarians and midwives for the global financial crisis of 2008, on the back of which David Cameron got into power, after which Theresa May assumed power, after which Boris Johnson assumed power, all three of whom led governments that sought to blame or sought to pursue cuts to public services. I guess less so Johnson, actually. He's had quite a lot on his plate. That were sold to you as an ideological necessity to make up for all the money that had been lost by bankers in the first decade of this millennium. So it always happens on Mondays, doesn't it? I bite off more than I can chew. Even I forget, lose sight of what it is we're supposed to be talking about, having gone off on a bit. What am I talking about having my ears syringed for in 1978? Building round the corner from the roller disco. I think it's just madness. Luckily, I can just about make out a thread, the end of which we nudge ever closer to. What's it like on the ground? Just NHS professionals, GPs in particular, on the question of shortages. I'm going to put it to you, and this is why I'll never get a column in the Sun or the Daily Mail, that the problem is pretty simple. We don't have enough GPs. 03456060973, which is why if you are a GP and you have exercised your prerogative to be free to work when you want to work, you can retire when you want to retire, you can negotiate whatever contract you want with your employers, we're coming for you next. We've caused a shortage of GPs by making their job harder, by inviting many of them to sling their hook and go back to where they came from, by imposing cuts up and down the NHS, and as a fully paid up member of the right-wing media, I'm coming for you now, Doc, because the alternative would be to admit that I caused this problem. And I ain't going to do that in a billion years, any more than I'm going to put my hands up for the catastrophe of Brexit. So what's going on? Have we just got a shortage of GPs? Or is there something more complicated, sophisticated going on? 03456060973. I know how awful it is not to be able to see a doctor when you want to see a doctor. Do you know who understands that even better than I do? Do you know who understands that even better than you do? Yeah, the average blinking doctor. But don't let that stop you sharpening your cudgels this morning and having a swing at them. Is it just a shortage? 03456060973. And right across the NHS, This story could be the tip of an iceberg, or it could be a slight overreaction. Six medical bodies and staff groups warning of a growing tide of abuse, including assaults from patients. Now, those are stories that I would like to hear, because that is a world I don't know about, and these are issues I don't understand. 03456060973. And these are the calls I pray for, and I'm not getting them at the minute. If you were clapping on your doorstep 6 months ago, how come now you've been already successfully persuaded that doctors are your enemy and they deserve a kicking. And maybe you're too busy hating on civil servants to actually be hating on doctors yet. But by this time tomorrow, the world would have turned. What's persuaded you that the people who steered us through the NHS, despite an almost abject absence of political leadership, are now the next target for the Tory media's 2-minute hate? 0345 6060 973. 22 minutes after 10. Do you know, I do worry. Sometimes you think I might exaggerate, or because none of us have got 20/20 hindsight, I may be misremembering. So I'll give you 2 front pages, shall I, from the Daily Express, 5 years apart. This one is October the 18th, 2016. Cheaper food after EU exit. And this one is October the 11th, 2021. That's today, isn't it? I think, yeah. Start warning, get used to higher food bills. I mean, yeah. What am I supposed to do in these sort of situations? It is raining outside. I have stuck my head out and it got wet. I am therefore reporting to you that it's raining. But now, for balance, we go to someone who claims it's as dry as a bone. October 2016, cheaper food after EU exit. October 2021, start warning, get used to higher food bills. And precisely the people responsible for this con are now turning their attention to the NHS. And it will work. In fact, we can find the evidence that it's already beginning to work in the warning from 6 medical bodies and staff groups that their members are already facing a tide of abuse, including assaults from patients, as a consequence of a situation created by politicians and stoked by journalists. And if I'm wrong, give me a call and tell me I'm wrong. 23 minutes after 10. I'm a Catholic. I love being told I'm wrong. Jamie's in Northampton to kick things off. Jamie, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello.
We're getting abuse every day. You know, it's every hour we have phone calls that are abusive. We have patients shouting at us, screaming at us. We've had receptionists spat at. And the same, they come in clutching newspaper articles in their face-to-face appointments, telling us when are we going to start seeing them face-to-face. They're being almost gaslighted into believing that when we're actually...
What do they think you're doing? What do they do? They think you're playing table football?
I just don't get it, because
origami.
do you know
what?
Well, I've been this weekend. I spent my weekend doing COVID vaccinations on the booster program, the flu vaccination clinic. I'm here again this morning. I'm going to be here all week.
Yes.
I don't understand how they don't realise that when they've come to get their COVID vaccinations, when they've come in with symptoms that could be COVID, and when we've been treating them, and yes, we've had lots of patients who didn't come in during the pandemic because they had symptoms that were worrying, but they were scared to come to the surgery. We were actively trying to encourage people to come down, and I just don't get it. And
well, you do get it. I mean, you get it intellectually. Yeah. You mentioned they come in clutching the newspaper articles. They come in with their TV and radio agitators ringing in their ears, and they come in and they spit at your receptionist. I mean, it's like night following day. It's if they can. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If they can turn you against firefighters, they can turn you against anyone. And it's your turn, Jamie. You're a GP, I'm presuming.
That's it, yeah, GP Northampton. It's the same media, though, that completely ignored the attack on a GP surgery in Manchester, where, one GP, 4 receptionists were put into hospital with head injuries. This kind of stuff isn't getting covered in the press, but it's being stoked at by the media. You don't?
Well, I don't know the details of that myself, so I'll accept a modicum of guilt. But I don't know whether that attack was a result of pent-up frustrations, arguably stoked by media coverage, or whether it was an entirely different kettle of fish. And I don't mind for the moment about that, because I do know now what you have told me. So, I mean, perhaps it was a little bit of hyperbole when you said every hour. So, I mean, really, would you go a day ever without somebody shouting in your waiting room? Is that shouting in your surgery?
Sometimes it can be aggressive, and sometimes it can be passive-aggressive. It's that comment at the end of the consultation, like, oh, thank goodness you're seeing me now after you've been doing nothing all pandemic. It's those kind of things that, do you know what? If you're close to retirement, that's going to push you over the edge. Forget the money. That's the thing that's going to really be
well, this is the thing that I really do struggle to get my head around, in that what they are doing, whether they realise it or not, and I think for many of them, this isn't a defence, but it's a bit like having these fixed gear bicycles. You've only got one gear. They just don't know how else to behave. If you've got to put a front page on a right-wing newspaper, all you know how to do is to turn your readers against whoever today's target is, whether it's firefighters or bureaucrats or civil servants or people in Brussels or single mothers or the unemployed. It's literally all you do. It's like the only language you can speak. But what they're doing here is creating an environment in which GPs are less likely to want to do the job for much longer.
Well, it's even worse than that, because we've had hospital consultants who will believe it all as well. Last month I organised a teaching event. I run teaching events for GPs, and one of the things we had a hospital consultant saying, look, when are you guys going to open your doors again? It's really inconvenient, blah, blah, blah. And it's a degree of divide and conquer. If you divide the profession, you can then start trying to, I do whatever you want to us. And I'm not sure what it is, but my suspicion is there's a degree of, well, let's make it all private. And actually, that wouldn't surprise me.
Well, we're back where we often are with the current government. Is there a sinister master plan, in this case the sort of Chomsky-esque model of surreptitious privatisation, or is it just a complete absence of clarity and leadership leading to confusion and catastrophe? And it's going to get worse, because the lockdown will have cloaked a lot of symptoms and seen a lot of people less likely to go to the doctor, and that means that there will be a backup of potential problems. But what the hell do you want if you've got a backup of potential medical problems? You want a medical service, a health service that feels well-resourced, well-respected and with high morale. So everybody currently trying to undo the morale, undermine the morale of the doctors and nurses will have, if not literal, then metaphorical blood on their hands. Jamie, I'm not going to ask you any more questions because there will be other doctors on the line. 0345 606 0973. If they can turn you against firefighters, they can turn you against anyone. In this instance, doctors. I wonder if you give me a call and admit that I'm just talking about you, and you can describe to me how it works. How does it work? How can you hear an invitation to hate doctors and think, yeah, I'll have a bit of that, and then 6 months ago, I'm banging my saucepan with a wooden spoon. These people are amazing. I mean, hello? Gemma's in Blackpool. Gemma, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Gemma.
I must say hello to a fellow person who lives from where I came from and went to school in Kidderminster.
You're joking.
But I have quite a northern accent now.
You have lost your accent. That's called social climbing, that is. You've dropped your Kidderminster accent and you've got a tinge of the Lancashires because you want to get invited to higher class soirees. That's what it is, Gemma.
It's all right. I can refer when I want to.
We all can. We all can. Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, I'm all right, Gemma. What do you want to tell me?
I represent patients. And how do we represent them? Through a patient group. They're a national group.
Oh, yes.
A doctor's contract has that in its contract to have one.
Yes.
And we work with our doctors all the time, and our practice is fabulous. Swanton practice has just behaved superbly through COVID, and they have been through the mill like every practice in the country. On Saturday, they were all there. We've got the local theatre, which we use for vaccinations, and 1,600 flu vaccinations were given that morning. And it worked like clockwork, and we work together as a team. So I've got a team of about 12. We volunteer on everything that we can do to help. We work with the doctors. I didn't know anything, James, about how a doctor's practice really works till we...
Well, you could get a column in the Daily Mail then, probably, to write about how a doctor's practice really works, Gemma.
I know. They could do with a bit of learning, I say. But
how bad is it on the ground? What sort of... I mean, your surgery sounds great, and
they are.
You are lucky, but the GP bashing that you are exposed to on a sort of national scale, how does that leave you feeling?
It makes me cross. And when you've got all these people queuing up for their vaccinations, it's a good time to engage. Yes. And they've only been waiting a few minutes and might start complaining.
I did think this, and I don't like to bring the B word into everything, but it's becoming a sort of psychological flaw on my part. I'm going to have to start resisting it. But it is odd, isn't it, the way that people will respond more to what's being whispered in their ear than they will to what is actually in front of them. So there'll be people who actually have quite good interactions with their GP surgery, but they've still been successfully stoked up into this position of anger. Gemma, thank you. I shall give your love to the old country. You've made me a little bit late for the news, but I'll just squeeze this in apropos that point I just made. James, I'm a GP in West London. I couldn't agree more with the one you had on just now. I'm exhausted and worked throughout the pandemic. My brother-in-law died during the pandemic, so I took 3 days off to his funeral and returned to abuse. In a face-to-face appointment, James, I had a patient shout at me on my return asking when I was going to get off my arse and start seeing patients face-to-face. There it is. That person has had poison poured into his ears by the people that flogged. Well, you don't need me to tell you what they've been flogging recently. And they sit in a face-to-face appointment with a GP and shouts abuse at him about the fact that he's not having face-to-face appointments while he's in one. That's Brexit wang. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines. 10:35. So what happens then if the figure I've got is 2,000 fewer fully qualified full-time GPs than in 2015. I think that the way the public responded, or the way the public was incited to respond to the Insulate Britain protest, was really interesting last week. You saw it on our Facebook page, sadly, and on a lot of the replies to some of the footage that Rachel Venables filmed, people actively calling for crimes to be committed against the protesters, urging drivers to drive at them, for example, or to batter them. That's the public being turned against the public pretty easily. Although, of course, in the case of the protesters, they made a conscious decision to upset other members of the public. I had a life-changing experience in this studio many years ago when I heard and read and then took calls from people who'd been successfully turned against firefighters when they were undertaking industrial action to protect the terms and conditions that they had been promised when they joined the service. I couldn't believe it. And listen, firefighters aren't saints. There'll be firefighters listening to this that can be successfully turned against environmental protesters, or indeed even against doctors. We're all susceptible to this kind of propaganda and psychological gaslighting. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so effective. But if there's a shortage of doctors, what possible purpose is served by trying to blame doctors for it? Ideally, that's not what is happening. And you can ring me up and tell me, actually, James, what the real problem here is X, Y and Z. 0345 6060973. But we have a shortage of doctors, and we have an environment which doesn't feel very welcoming to me. Maybe you see it differently. Maybe you heard our first call from Northampton and thought, I'd love a job where I get spat at. I'd love to have a job where I get screamed at. Okay, you don't know your born, Keith, do you? But I don't fancy that. I had a job where I used to get shouted at on a regular basis, and I hated it. It was awful. But I was a journalist in a newsroom, which you kind of knew you were signing up for. Doctors wouldn't have expected this. Reception staff wouldn't have expected this on a regular basis. So we've got a shortage of doctors. We've got an increasingly toxic working environment for them, and we've got a right-wing media that appears to be coming for them. How's that going to end? 0345 6060973. So what is going on in your surgery? You're a doctor, you're a nurse, you're a receptionist. How bad is it? How unpleasant is it? And as for the rest of us, why are we so reluctant to work stuff out? You've got a shortage of doctors, you will have fewer appointments. If you have fewer appointments, you should be calling for more doctors, not shouting at the doctors you've already got to get their finger out or get off their backsides or whatever it may be. But hey-ho, you sell a hell of a lot more tickets for the ghost train than you ever will for the Speak Your Weight machine. Bridget's in Reading. Bridget, what can you tell us?
Oh, hi, good morning, James.
Hello, Bridget.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. No one shouts at me in the course of my working day.
Yeah, so I'm a GP in Reading, and it is very, very bad. But it was bad before COVID.
Yes.
And it was bad before Brexit sort of kicked in that we were just really short of GPs. And, it's not uncommon to wait 5 weeks for a face-to-face, for example.
Which is scary. And it's the last thing you want to be doing. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you already. You carry on.
So, now it's even worse than that because, patients...
Sorry, I know I said I wouldn't interrupt, but the phone line's awful, Bridget.
How about now?
I know doctors have terrible handwriting, famously, but you could at least have a clearer phone line, surely. Yes, if you just sort of take me off speaker or whatever it is you've done.
Yeah, you're not on speaker, but okay. I will sit more still.
That's better.
So at the moment, when I come in, I'm fully booked before I've even started.
Right. With
phone calls. And most of those people have waited 3 weeks to have a routine phone call. So they've written to us or emailed or phoned and waited, and then they'll speak to me, and actually I need to see them. There's plenty of things I need to see, but I don't have any slots.
So you triage over the phone?
Yes, but that's not determined by me. That's determined by the practice. I'm I've already got a full list upon arrival.
I'm going to try and get your phone line improved, Bridget, because I want the detail of this, but I can't really hear what you're saying. It's nobody's fault, least of all yours. It happens sometimes in the passage from the switchboard to the studio. And anybody else who can add to this, 03456060973. John's in Portsmouth. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I have a son. He's at university. Just started. He's got asthma and he's been sick for 2 weeks and he can't get a doctor's appointment. He's walked to the surgery. He's been fobbed off. He's been told to go to the pharmacy. He did the e-consult. They told him to go to the pharmacy. Then they told him to go to 111. He called 111. He got a recorded message saying there's nothing you can do. Go to the pharmacy. So I've been trying to help him. So I have managed to find a private service online. 90 quid for 6 months, appointment immediately. I I just checked just there now because I use it. I get it free from work. Okay, 11:20 I get an appointment. It's 10:40 now. 11:20 I get an appointment. I've used it before. It works really, really well. That's where we're going. And
why wouldn't you? I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, we could have a philosophical or a political or an ideological debate about this, but why wouldn't you? Your boy's poorly, he can't get seen.
Correct.
You can afford it. You'd be daft not to.
Correct. And you might remember when dentists were free.
Yeah.
You might or might not remember.
No, of course I do.
Now you don't get free dentists. So
some people do, but it's harder and harder to.
Yeah, but it's really, really hard to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't want to put taxes up, there's your answer. You push people over to that service,
and the people who can't afford it.
Well, they're just stuck, you know.
Just have a look at their teeth. Have a look at what happened when they got squeezed out of NHS dentists.
Well, exactly. It's really sad. So I mean, we do have to accept that you've got to pay more tax, but if you don't do that, then this is what you end up with. And I've got the doctors are fantastic. The other issue is you don't train a doctor in 3 months or 3 years. It takes 10 years. Where's that investment? That's government responsibility. They're not doing it. They're not interested.
Well, that's what we need to find out, because you know the rhetoric of the last few years has been all about training our own or doing the jobs that people were coming over here to do. I don't know how big a slice of the workforce has been removed as a result of that sort of people leaving the profession and or leaving the country. But I do know this, and this is weird. Maybe someone can help. John, I'm cracking on partly because your phone line wasn't great either. It's going to be one of those days. Is it a full moon? I knew a lad, and he went to Eton. All right, I'll tell you that from the start, because it gives you an indication of how privileged he was. So you know, if there were doors that he could have gone through, he would be best placed and where those doors were and how to get through them. And he got straight A's in his A levels. This was before the pandemic, going back about 4 or 5 years, and I didn't understand it at the time, and I don't understand it now. He got straight A's in his A-levels, which isn't as rare as it was when we were kids, but still obviously is pretty impressive. And he couldn't get into medical school because they were full. I think he got offered a deferred place, but he didn't want to take a year off. He got straight A's in his A-levels and qualified, but he couldn't get into medical school. I don't know why, but I do remember reading at the time about a shortage of medical or an oversubscription to medical school places. And I do wonder really whether much of the media would be better served focusing on questions like that rather than issuing invitations to start hating on your GP. If you are a GP, what's gone on in your surgery? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And take it up to 11 o'clock. So how do we get patients involved in this? I don't need you to tell me how frustrating it is not to be able to get an appointment. And in the absence of that, and with politicians who aren't going to take responsibility for the situation they've had 11 years either to fix or to alleviate, and most of the media now dedicated, particularly when it comes to the public sector, dedicated to encouraging you to blame them, civil servants and doctors in the firing line this morning. I don't know quite what the antidote looks like. That quote from Chomsky that I mentioned at the beginning of the programme, and Chomsky is far from infallible, but he's also far from stupid. That's the standard technique of privatisation. Defund, make sure things don't work, people get angry, you hand it over to private capital. And from Noam Chomsky to Joni Mitchell, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. It is 10:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A few more questions than answers, inevitably, really, when a potential crisis in the NHS, certainly in GP surgeries, with one newspaper reporting that there are 2,000 patients for every GP, and another newspaper reporting that NHS waiting lists are triggering a tide of abuse against staff. You'd think the major priority would be getting more people into the profession, which it doesn't seem to be. I mean, what is it they do when they announce a new hospital? They give it a lick of paint. They give an old hospital a lick of paint or build an extension and then call it a new hospital. Maybe we could buy some new shoes for GPs and announce that we've got lots of new GPs. That seems to be the modus operandi for the current government. But on a more serious note, how does this end? And it's all very well lazily quoting Chomsky, as I just did, but what happens if there is a push towards privatisation? I mean, ironically enough, given that I can't help tying everything together, that front page from the Daily Express I mentioned from 2016 with the glorious headline, "Cheaper Food After EU Exit," was drawing on a report from, wait for it, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Cheaper food after EU exit. 5 years later, same newspaper, start warning, get used to higher food bills. And of course, your so-called think tanks are pretty much unanimous in thinking that the NHS should be privatised or should be carved up in some sense. But what happens if it is? Is it just like dentistry? So I get bored of saying this to you, but I have to mention it. Otherwise, you could accuse me, or you could think that I was not being honest with you. I am middle class and comfortably off. So I can pay to go to the dentists, for example. I don't have private health insurance, but I could afford it. And I certainly wouldn't sacrifice my health or my children's health upon the altar of my political ideologies or my political beliefs, and that's the problem. But even if we did have this, if everybody who can afford it started paying for their healthcare, paying for GP services, what would happen to the country as a whole? And one worries that dentistry is a bit of a canary down the coal mine for that. But you never really read stories about people who can't afford to go to the dentist because you're too busy reading stories about why you should get cross with your local GP. Rakia is in Acton. Rakia, what can you tell me?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think it's the first time I've ever spoken to you, actually.
What do you mean you think it is? I'd like to think you'd remember.
No, because I've called LBC before, but I think it's the first time I've ever spoken to you.
Well, this is the big time. This is the big time, Rakia. Congratulations. You're out of the little leagues.
Thanks. So there's a couple of points I want to make about this. So the first is that actually the lack of doctors that we have. Now, if we don't have enough doctors, what we should be doing is opening up more places at university.
Yes.
So I have a niece and I have two sons who are at A-level. One's at A-level and my niece has just finished her A-level. The competition to get into medicine is crazy.
Yeah.
You have to get 3 A's. That's the entry requirement on UCAS. Ask for 3 A's in biology and chemistry and one other. Mm-hmm. 80% of the offers are at A star, A for the 3 subjects you've got.
Yeah.
So even if if you've got 3 A's, you still can't get into medicine. There's about 2,700 people that apply per university for medicine. Only 600 places. So you have people and students out there that have the academic ability to become doctors, but you're not letting them. Not you personally. The system isn't allowing them to become doctors, and so they'll go into another industry. The government should be doing something about opening up more places at university for medicine, and having 3 A stars as an entry requirement is crazy.
Well, it isn't. It isn't, because it sounds crazy, but they're turning people away. There are no empty spaces, so it doesn't matter. So you can't lower the entry requirements if they're already oversubscribed.
No, you can't lower the entry requirement, but if they're saying 80% of the offers, where the entry requirement is 3 A's, 80% of the offers are given to A star and 2 A stars or 3 A star subjects.
No, I did understand what you said.
You're turning away people that have A's. So if I end up getting 3 A's, I'll get rejected. I see what you mean. We've got a chicken and egg scenario here. So if you have more places, then inevitably the entry requirements would come down.
So you don't change the entry requirements. You just free up more places, and the entry requirements. So, do we know why? Do we know why we've ended up in a situation where we've got more people who want to be doctors, want to train to be doctors, than we have places?
That once you finish your 4th year at medicine, you have to have an NHS placement for you to work in the UK. And it's the placements in the NHS that they don't have enough of.
Right, we need to check this. So you're not a doctor?
I'm not a doctor, no, but I've been trying to apply. I'm looking to apply for medicine for my son.
No, that's fine. I'm not. It's not a criticism. It just makes sense to me. So you can only have training places that would have hospital places, and that because we've got a shortage of hospital places, we've got a limit on how many. I hadn't thought of that. Sometimes I'm a bit stupid. I need people to explain stuff to me. So we need someone in the system. And they've only got 4 minminutes to confirm that. One of the reasons why we can't train more doctors is because we don't have the capacity for them in the hospitals.
That's why I think it is. But the thing is, if we're saying we have a lack of doctors in the NHS, surely the people that come out from the universities on training, put them in these places. So then you end up having more medical university doctors or trainees in the NHS helping out. That's what I think.
Cost of training is one reason
given. And then
it's
the cost of training, yes. So you've got that. Then you have to have, on top of with your A-levels, you have to sit a UCAT or a BMAT, which is an entry online test that you have to score quite high on. If you have to do that in the year you apply, so if you decide not to do it this year, end up getting 3 A stars at A-level, you can't apply. You have to wait the following year. So some students are not going to take a gap year just to do a UCAT, and then they're competing with the people who have just finished their A-level. It's like a vicious circle.
And there's no real sign of it coming to an end. I thank you, Rakia. Congratulations on making your debut on the big show. Sal Brinton is, of course, the Liberal Democrats' health and social care spokesperson in the House of Lords, and she's just tweeted me to say that the current doctor shortage, which is hospital and GP, stands at about 50,000. In 2019, which are the last numbers we've got, it isn't actually. In 2019, the limit on medical school was 8,300. And she's put increased in quotes because the quotes increased end quotes admission for 2021 is, wait for it, 8,300. And the government limits places because of the cost of training. So this is quite interesting then. The mantra to train our own would actually be expensive. And, there is a social justice argument here that we shouldn't be taking medics who've been trained in poorer economies than this one and benefiting from their state-subsidised education in our state-funded health service. But until you fix these holes, until you plug these gaps, you've got a whole road ahead of you that looks to me to be full of problems. I genuinely don't know what the solution is. And the more we talk about it, the more I wonder whether or not there is actually any sinister master plan in place. I suppose there is money to be made, isn't there? And that's the problem. So I do that very naive thing of wondering what the big picture is. And I forget that if you've been offered the opportunity to make a few quid out of the people who will be able to afford private health, then you're not actually going to worry about anybody else. Not only will you be able to afford private health, you'll be making a significant profit, a healthy profit out of all the people that can afford private health. So the idea that you're going to think, oh no, perhaps we shouldn't do this because it would be, in a utilitarian sense, bad for the society as a whole is for the birds. So I don't think there is a sort of an overarching master plan. It's just, here is the NHS. They look at all the money that's sloshing around the NHS and they think, well, we'll have a bit of that. And that is perhaps why it is the shady lobby groups and the right-wing newspapers and all of the people that have persuaded the country to embark upon this ridiculous period of economic damage and labour force decimation that are now turning their attention to the health service. Although, me, sometimes I see things that aren't necessarily there because I'm as guilty as anybody is of seeing what I want to see. Recruitment, writes Ramina, who is a registrar in Leeds, to medicine general practice is less of an issue than retention. There's no point training more people when we're hemorrhaging doctors within the first few years of becoming a GP due to the toxic working conditions. And that really knits together everything we've talked about this hour. The mood music is the opposite of standing on our doorsteps on Thursday nights last year and clapping for the NHS. The pay rises and the pay freezes, or the real terms pay cuts, are probably going to get worse if inflation heads in the direction that the Bank of England expects it to head. And the media environment of selling tickets for the ghost train and encouraging us to bite chunks out of each other, brackets, if they can turn you against firefighters, they can turn you against anybody, close brackets, will make the working environment even more toxic than it is already. So overworked, under-resourced, underfunded, and under attack now from the right-wing media. And already we're seeing people leave the profession much, much earlier than they would ordinarily have been expected to. I don't have the answers, but I do think it's important. I think it's my job, actually, if not even, to be pompous for a moment, my professional duty to give you the actual facts rather than to stoke up your feelings. Because if you're on the phone today and you're worried and you're in pain and you're trying to get hold of a doctor and you're struggling and you've got to fill in this form or get an ID from the surgery so that you can log on online and have a telephone appointment and then hopefully see somebody face-to-face 2 or 3 weeks, you are absolutely ripe. You are so ripe for my provocations and my deceits. I could have you furious by the time this music playing in the background finishes. I could have you screaming abuse, either in person or metaphorically at doctors, but I don't like to do that. 3 minutes after 11 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I turn our attention next to a story that what's the word I'm looking for? I don't struggle with the story. I struggle with a sort of, what a sense of embarrassment, actually. And it is linked to, it's not entirely separate from the Me Too movement. I don't know if you were listening to me when the Me Too floodgates broke, and it was the Harvey Weinstein accusations that prompted a hell of a lot of women to come forward. And I think the conversation changed, I used to say forever, but I don't think anything ever changes forever. The pendulum theory of public discourse is probably the thing to which I'm most committed. You can see things swing one way, then they swing back the other. But the conversation certainly changed for a generation. And the idea that half of the population had no idea what life was like for the other half of the population, despite the fact that you'd given birth to us and married us and grown up with us, really still stings. It really, crikey, it's not about men, but it is about everyone. And even if, and I know this is true of a lot of men, because I've had this conversation on air and off air, even if you knew some of the things that had happened to your loved ones, or just your mates, your female mates, you hadn't quite combined all of these stories into a social problem. And I think that, for example, the Sarah Everard case and the discussions we've had about the Sarah Everard case feels different from how it would have felt 10 years ago. There is a sense that these are not black swans. These are not freakish occurrences. These are tips of icebergs. These are culminations of deep institutional and endemic misogyny, and that the way women are routinely treated and abused by men is something that women have lived with for forever, actually. And men who kind of, I'm speaking about myself here, lest there be any doubt, men who knew but didn't know, men who kind of recognised the individual stories but failed completely to see how they combined to create a society-wide problem or issue. I don't know. That's why I say I feel uncomfortable admitting it, because, well, I don't feel uncomfortable admitting it, but I feel embarrassed remembering it. It was, well, yeah, oh, crikey. So every woman you know has got a story about being assaulted or worse, but you don't somehow extrapolate from that probably every woman in the country has had an experience of being sexually assaulted or worse. I don't know why that is. There's a degree of rose-tinted spectacles here, perhaps, for men. And that the weirdest bit about it is that you knew the people in your own life to whom it had happened. But you failed to, or perhaps you didn't, some of us failed to see the bigger picture, for want of a slightly less cliched phrase. And I think this might be the same. It's less traumatic territory, but I think it's the same principle. It's a story about how 2 in 5 working mothers believe that being a parent is holding them back from promotion. About a third said that people who worked the longest hours were most respected by senior managers. And the study found that parents with young children found that almost half did not believe that senior leaders in the organisations for which they worked were positive role models for achieving a good work-life balance. So I'm at risk of getting my head blown off before I've even reached the first junction this hour. I think those numbers are better than they would have been 10 years ago. My oldest is 15 now, can you believe, if you've been listening to the programme for a while. But when we had our first and my wife went back to work, it was as if she was carrying the mark of Cain. And you know, she was working in the media, but it's no different to any other profession in many ways. You still really should get paid for the hours that you do, and you should have a fairly clear indication at the beginning of the week of what hours you're going to be required to do. But this slightly sort of post-war model of thinking that the amount of hours you spend at the coalface is an indication of how much work you've done, even if you spend most of it sitting on your backside and twiddling your thumbs, remains in place. So going back to work in, what would it have been, 2006, 2007, regardless of how successful or how good you'd been before, was, I mean, you would be either explicitly or implicitly shown the door, I think, in many cases. You'd certainly have to give up any hope of advancing up the career ladder. And by the way, people who manage to do so, they don't prove that the problem doesn't exist, any more than the fact that you haven't seen any shortages in your supermarket yet doesn't mean that there aren't any shortages in other supermarkets. Or if you've never had chicken pox, it doesn't mean that chicken pox doesn't exist. So that ludicrous temptation to think, well, I've never seen a black swan, therefore black swans clearly don't exist. It's just silly. So park that. You also probably would think that a woman who ends up running a FTSE 100 company or heading up the Met, although I don't think Cressida Dick is a mum, and this is a story about mums, would have had to work 10 times harder than anybody else to achieve those positions. So even success in these contexts doesn't prove the absence of the problem. Virtually everyone surveyed by the charity said that work-life balance was a top priority and would influence their next choice of job. That's something else that's changing for the better, but we don't like change as a rule. The idea that you're not going to define yourself by your job, you're going to live to work. You're not going to, I beg your pardon, you're going to work to live. You're not going to live to work is pretty. And also, again, covering all the bases before we throw open the phone lines, obviously this can happen to men as well. If you share the childcare duties outside of the workplace, then you are going to be susceptible to much of the problems that have traditionally beset mums much more than dads. So with all of those caveats and qualifications in place, how can you tell? That's the question I got for you. And it's not a question born of scepticism or cynicism. Oh, yeah, all right, yeah. Oh, you don't think you're going to get promoted, do you? Oh, yeah, and you think it's because you're a mum, not just because you're rubbish. Right, you are. Yeah, give me a ring and tell me that. No, it's born of believing you, but also thinking that perhaps some of us could do with a little bit more evidence, information. I've got, 5 paragraphs in the Times today, which is essentially a précis of the research. I also have my personal experience. All of my female friends who've had children. I'm just going to check that at the door. Yeah, I can categorically say that all of my female friends who've had children have found it harder to thrive at work than my male friends. And bearing in mind that most of them are married. So you've still got that slightly outdated idea that the man is more likely to stay at work, whether during the maternity period or whether for the duration of the children's earliest years, and then mum goes back to work at the end of that. And also, a kid gets sick at school. Normally, mum's going to get the phone call rather than dad. Not always. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that a majority equals a unanimity. But there is still very much a post-Victorian, probably, model in this country that doesn't exist in others, which is something we'll get onto, of... Well, I told you, didn't I, many years ago, I was sitting at one of those awful dinner parties and there's a bloke there says, well, I bring home the bacon and she cooks it. And I thought, good Lord, if I don't intervene sooner, someone's going to chin him, and it might well be my wife. I bring home the bacon and she cooks it. And I thought, oh, Lord. So that would be one extreme of the post-Victorian model, but we all probably have surreptitiously subscribed to it in some way. So you are a mum, and you went back to work either after a short period of maternity leave or after a longer period of parenting. The kids started primary school or whatever it may be. How do you know that it was the fact you were a mother that held you back from promotion, or worse, or that prompted your boss to make you feel less welcome than you had done before? How do you know? What? Because listen, again, with the Me Too movement, some men needed it spelling out in glorious technicolor what you had taken for granted for your entire life. And I think this may well be one of those things. What was the thing that happened? You had children, you went back to work sooner or later, and you are pretty confident that your ability to climb the ladder at work was compromised quite significantly by the fact that you had become a mother. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I don't want an argument on this one, really. I just want to hear what it was like. I want to hear the stories and the experiences, and also your thoughts on whether or not 2 in 5 working mothers, it seems either realistic or, and again I say this slightly aware of storing up some problems, that sounds like progress to me. I think when my oldest was born, we'd have been closer to 5 in 5 working mothers would have been fairly confident that being a parent was holding them back from promotion in their job. 15 years ago, I think that figure would have been 4 in 5. I could be wrong. You tell me, and you can go back as far on this as you want. So what is it like, in a way that perhaps men don't understand? What is it like, or fathers don't understand? What is it like for mothers to return to the workplace and either quickly or slowly clock the fact that your professional advancement is going to be a very different kettle of fish from what it would have been if you hadn't had a child? The number you need, and you will get through, is 0345 6060973. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. This comes, for your information, from a study by the charity Working Families, which is launching its National Work-Life Week. And the chief exec says, while increasingly high numbers of managers and leaders recognise the benefits of family-friendly ways of working, there you go, I told you there'd been progress, there are still pockets of resistance across sectors. The pandemic has speeded up a shift in how many of us want to work, and those resisting positive change will find it comes back to bite them. So we've got 85% of working parents now saying that they're going to prioritise work-life balance when looking for their next role. We may get onto that, into the bigger question of work-life balance, but I want to begin with the working mum. You have a baby, you go back to work, you know that you're being looked at differently. You know that being a mum is being held against you in some way, either explicitly or implicitly, either out in the open or just quietly in the background. And I want to know how you know. That's all. I'm sorry if I sound stupid. I certainly sound trusting, I hope, because I do trust you. I just haven't experienced it myself. And as ever, when I haven't experienced something myself, I find it best to hold off having a pungent opinion until I've spoken to lots of people who have experienced it themselves. If that's you, 0345 6060973. It's 11:15. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. I suppose, looking further down the rail tracks, how do you fix it? I mean, other countries do it better. The Scandinavian model cited quite a lot, and it's also probably a little bit annoying to people in Scandinavia to be lumped together like that. But as I understand it, and I have some experience of Denmark, actually, the work-life model there, or the parenting in the workplace model, is completely different. Both mum and dad can leave early, I think, on 2 days of the week to pick up children. So the division of labour in the home is already different, but the acknowledgement that if I work for you, I am a father working for you, not just an employee, not just a man, and therefore I will be treated differently in some ways from members of staff who are not parents. So we may get onto that, but I'm more interested in the working mothers who are confident that being a parent held them back from promotion. Imagine I was sceptical. Imagine I was saying, it was because you're a mum, was it? Not just because there was a better candidate. How would you convince fictional sceptical me that it was being a mum that held you back as opposed to anything else? 19 minutes after 11 is the time, and Liv is in Bristol. Liv, what would you like to say?
Hiya. So it's Liz, actually.
Liz?
Liz, yeah, like Elizabeth.
Oh, have I got live on here?
I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe I think I must say it strangely.
Live and let live. Liz, what would you like to say?
Yes, first-time caller. I'm pretty nervous.
It's only me.
I'll give it a go. So I'm a teacher, and I went on. First of all, when I was training, I specialised in primary teaching, and then specialised in English, like leading English. And in the school, English is classed as like a main subject.
Of course.
So English and maths are kind of the head subjects in primary school that we focus on.
Yes.
And then you have foundation subjects, your core and foundation subjects. I always had foundation subjects, but as you move up in school, as you move up, you're more experienced, you tend to lead more of the core subjects. In my school, we have a team leading English and a team leading maths.
Right.
And when I came back off of maternity leave, I was really clear. I was like, I've got the qualification. I'm really passionate. I've been doing my own research. I'd really like to be part of the English leading team. And I was told that while I was part-time, that would not happen. Just full stop. You are not full time. We cannot give that to you. Now there's a team of people leading English in my school. So there's 3 people. So you could argue that I might not have been available on the days that I was at home looking after my children.
How many days were you working? And actually, before you answer that question, is that a fair question?
No, it's not.
Good job I checked then. Are you sure? I mean, if you were working half a day a week, it would be relevant, wouldn't it?
No, I don't think so, because a lot of teaching is done. A lot of the job that I do, I'd say about 40% of my job is actually stood in class.
No, I know that, but if I was in your team and you were my leader and I was working 40 hours a week and you were working 4, would I not have a valid grievance on some level?
But you're being paid for 40 hours a week and I'm being paid for 4.
But you're my leader.
But no, that's not really how it works.
Forgive me.
The English team, they do things like book scrutinies. They do things like introducing new schemes of work. They kind of are in charge of how we manage reading in the school. So actually, I would just do my percentage of work for that, and it doesn't take. You don't like it. If I'm a class teacher, being a plus an English lead, I wouldn't spend all my time doing English lead stuff. I still have a class.
What did you say? It was the head that told you this?
Yeah, it was.
What did you say?
I was just really shocked and disappointed. And I think I feel like you're in quite a vulnerable situation where you're just coming back off maternity leave. My baby was 9 months old, and she was, in the care of people that I had no idea. Obviously I'd done my research and sent her to a nursery that we liked, but really they were strangers looking after my children, my child. And so you've got a lot going on, but also just we have an extra in our household. We have an extra thing. We don't have any family who look after our children. It's literally my husband and me. So if my children are ill, we have 2 choices. My husband, who's like a video animator, can ask to work from home or to ask to take an unpaid day. Or I have to book a supply teacher and plan for that supply teacher and write notes for that supply teacher and set everything out. I have to go into school still and set all of the work out. It normally takes me a good hour and a half to 2 hours to arrange the work for the supply teacher to teach. So it's actually easier for my husband to take the time off.
Yes.
However, because my husband's a man, his work don't like the idea of him being at home with the kids. And actually, it's my responsibility.
So you mean almost subconsciously he'll say, I need a day off because my child's ill, and they'll be either thinking or possibly even saying, why can't your wife deal with that? Why can't Liz deal with that? Why can't your wife do it?
Yeah. Which is horrible, which is really horrible, because that adds to my guilt. But actually, I've got 2 children at home, but I also have 30 children in school who are reliant on me with a load of complex needs, who, when they turn up at 8:45 in the morning and see that I'm not there, could have anxiety, all sorts. They rely on me as well. So it's such a sexist system, and it's really...
Well, that's society. That's not just the system you're in. And do you have colleagues who are not mums? Are you conscious of them being treated differently? or not?
Well, how I've been teaching.
So the only bit I'm struggling with, and I hope this isn't unfair, is this isn't a conversation about should are part-time people being discriminated against at work. It's a question about are mums being discriminated against at work. And you can't separate the two, but rightly or wrongly, I can.
Well, I've been at my school for 8 years.
Yeah.
And there are people who have been at my school for 2 years who are being offered to go on the English and maths teams.
Right.
The difficulty
but they're full-time, right?
Yeah. I was going to say,
that's right. So I hope I'm not sounding unsupportive, but this distinction between being a mum and not being a mum while you're doing the same role and the same job is not the same as you comparing yourself to full-time people and feeling squeezed, is it?
No, but I guess the second point that I made is the fact that there's a societal expectation that the mum stays home,
and that's where we come up against the chicken and egg bit of it, actually, and it's why it was probably wrong with me at the beginning to say we'll focus on this bit of it rather than the broader need for social change. Or in fact what this charity's research has done is use this as a stepping stone into a conversation about work-life balance in general, because that's going to have to involve everybody, and a lot of people, of course, inevitably and quite rightly pointing out the plight of single parents. Liz, take care. Thank you. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Quite a few I'll rattle through, but I want to get some texts out first. James, it's not even mothers. I didn't have kids, but I know that I was overlooked on the basis that I might become a mother. Yes, of course, one hears of that. I used to work for one of the UK's biggest insurance companies as a customer service advisor, James. I spent 2 years trying to get a role on the live chat department. I was given the role when I was 6 months pregnant. When I returned to work after my maternity leave, they took the role off me and put me back on the phones. That's Rebecca in Manchester, who says, I was devastated. Paula is in Hackney. Paula, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
how are you
Paula.
doing?
Pretty good. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to say to you, it's been very apparent for me in my career that this has been something that's a kibosh over my head, if you will. On returning from my first maternity leave, I'm currently off the last few weeks of my second at the moment, so apologies if the baby wakes up. We're in the car.
I apologise.
And I've pulled over.
One of my favourite sounds.
Indeed. So when I returned back to work, my husband had taken shared parental leave with me, and my boss said to me, Paula, you can't expect to have a career and children, so you need to manage your expectations with regards to looking for promotion within the business. To say that I was devastated was...
I think that's against the law.
Yes, it 100% is against the law.
It was a male
however,
manager, was it, or a female manager?
No, female.
Yeah, I'm so glad I checked there, because I nearly went straight in, bloody blokes, but then I thought, hang on a minute, I wonder. And it was a female manager. Did she have children?
Yeah. Oh yeah, she had a child and understood, but I think she's very much of the mindset, because I didn't have it, no one else can.
Right.
So with that kind of attitude. So for example, at the moment I'm waiting for the outcome to my flexible working request submission.
Yes.
That I'm expecting this week, and I'm not hopeful that I'll be successful with this application based on the attitudes of that particular individual. I'd like to say the company that I work for, I don't believe that it's the same across the whole business.
You've just got unlucky in your division, as it were, in your part of it. Well, it's all down to individuals. Everyone knows that in workplaces, doesn't it? You can have an identical job, and then the boss changes, and it goes from being the worst job in the world to the best job in the world, and of course vice versa.
Indeed. I mean, I was lucky enough to work for somebody else after coming back. We moved around within the division, but unfortunately, because of the misogyny that had been felt by my boss that I was with before maternity leave, she actually decided to hand in her notice in July, and I'm back with a boss who doesn't believe that you can have a family and a career.
But she did. The only bit I don't get is she had a job and a career, a baby and a career. No?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But and this is what I mean. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to help people up on that ladder. I mean, before they found out that I was pregnant, I had a very interesting conversation with my direct manager and her superior, and I was promised that the next promotion that became available on the team would be for me. So great, I thought that was wonderful. And then 4 months later, I fell pregnant. And unfortunately, the next two positions that came up that were above the grade above what I do now happened to be whilst I was on maternity. The first one I found out because the person who was leaving sent me a text to tell me that he was off. And it was made very difficult for me to apply for the position. And then the second position that became available for the grade above, my exiting manager made me aware of it, and I applied for the job, which is literally the job that I do now, just more money, essentially. And I was told that I wasn't suitable for an interview for the position, and that was in August.
And you read between the lines and conclude it's because you're a mum. It's a very interesting conversation. Thank you, Paula and Liz, because I'm 49 and my children are 15 and 13 now, and it is a different conversation from what it would have been when they were born. But that's no consolation to Paula or Liz, but it does perhaps explain why this figure says 2 in 5 rather than what I suggested a moment ago when I was in this position, when we were returning to work, or my wife was returning to work. I think it would have been closer to 4 in 5. Maybe in another 10 years, it'll be 0 in 5 mothers who think that they're being held back at work by dint of being mothers. You never know. 31 minutes after 11 is the time. Phone lines are open, 0345 6060973. I don't want to sound like a voyeur, but we haven't had any really vicious examples of it yet. Paula's was pretty bad, being told you can't have a career and a child. But, I mean, has anybody really had an unvarnished bullet delivered by a boss after returning from maternity leave or having a baby? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 25 to 12 is the time. Rachel is fizzing, not in a good way. I'm fizzing, she says, listening to teacher Liz just now. I live in Sweden. This issue just doesn't exist. Both parents are responsible for the child they both created. It's ridiculous that in 2021 women need to choose between having a child and having a career. And by career, we don't mean job. It's a useful distinction, that, actually. It's you can have a job if you've got a child, but don't think that you'll be getting advancements and promotions. And that's where the story of 2 in 5 working mothers believing that being a parent is holding them back from promotion kicks in. I'd love to speak to mums that have worked in both this country and others, if you can make that comparison from, as it were, the horse's mouth. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And I'm choosing my words very carefully here because I don't want to come across as pretending to play a supportive role while being secretly sceptical. I don't doubt any of the evidence either in your life or in this story, this research, but I'm sort of childishly fond of the zinger, the absolute irrefutable example of this sort of thing coming on. So I think Paula was pretty close, wasn't she? The female boss herself, a mother, saying you can't have a career and a child. But the really stark proof of how tough this is and how accurate this research is would be doubly welcome. 0345 6060973. Nikki's in Hawley. Nikki, what can you tell us?
Hello. Wow. So much to say. Wow. I would say a lot of the facts you're saying about proof of things is if you look at the amount of women who are really senior in lots of companies, that's kind of proof enough in a way.
Yes. Can't be a coincidence, can it?
No, I think absolutely not.
And I suppose some mums who are, incredibly career-driven, suddenly all of that ambition disappears when they have a child. It's possible, but it's not going to explain the kind of imbalance and disproportion that you described.
Absolutely. No, totally. There was lots of things I wanted to say. Just one thing before was when you were chatting to the lady who worked as a teaching teacher, and you said about part-time workers and would they be treated differently. From my experience, I would say a part-time worker who has children would definitely be treated differently because they've got to go home at that time. Yeah. If someone hasn't, if you haven't got children, you go, oh, can't you just stay for a bit because, you're going shopping. Yeah. So I would definitely think that people are...
Well, Emma takes it further, actually. Emma's had a perfectly justified swing at me. She says, when you say you can't compare the experience of full and part-time workers, you actually add to the discrimination because part-time workers are largely women. So excluding them from training and promotion on the basis of them being part-time is itself career limiting. So that's me told.
Yeah. I mean, flexi working would be the amazing thing if it worked. what I was calling about was my experience. It's over 8 years ago now.
Yes.
Things may have changed, so
yes.
I doubt it, but I worked for a massive sort of international law firm, doing events and conferences and stuff like that. And I left before I was to have a child because there was just no way I could do it. That's the job with a promotion, because the hours are just, insane. And I wasn't even a lawyer. And if you want to be a partner. So I chose a different role. I actually did some teaching. And that's another thing. Being a teacher when you've got a child is almost impossible. So you could be a TA, but being a teacher, I've got friends who want to still do it. It's so hard.
Why?
But if they could just do some kind of decent flexi working, that would make such a difference. But it was always seemed to be frowned upon. The women who were partners in the firm who did so well, everyone would be like, wow, but she's got children. And everyone would be like, in other words, what a bitch, you must never see them.
Yeah.
It's that unspoken. And I've said it myself, you feel it yourself, because to have my daughter, to think that I would see her as little as I would if I was a partner in a law firm, I just personally couldn't do it. Because it's,
So what we've got here, and this is me showing my generation, if not my age, what we've got here is, I'm coming at it as a child of my era, and I'm thinking this is a conversation about working mothers being overlooked for promotion at work. But actually, that's the end of the process. The beginning of the process is this hangover we've got of, despite most couples now are going to have significant periods of time when they both work, there's still an imbalance at home, which gets translated into the workplace between who's going to do who is perceived as the primary child carer or who is perceived as the primary breadwinner, often regardless of actual income.
I think what we're working from is what was set up like in the 50s kind of thing, in that everyone worked his hours, and then it was just maybe a secretary, then she got married and she stopped working. But it isn't like that now, so we need to totally, it sounds like other countries have, totally
Scandinavia, Sweden and Denmark. And that's what, and that you won't fix what we're describing until you've come at it from the bottom and you sort of reverse engineer the whole approach to the social policy. I think you're right, Nikki, and there's two things going on here that I think I'm guilty is a bit of a strong word, but it's the Catholic kicking in again, of wrong-headedness. The first is that idea, forgetting that this isn't about you just change what happens at work. You have to change things going way back in the family and the society. But also, I still have that thing. I mentioned this to you when we first did working from home in the context of COVID. I still have a slightly old-fashioned idea that if you're my boss, you say jump, I say how high. And I still get a little bit pompous, perhaps is the word, with younger colleagues who've got a very different idea about what the relationship between employer and employee is. I think I know why. I think it's because in my 20s, I thought the ship had sailed journalistically. So when I finally managed to get on board, it's a great story. If you ever witness one of my live events, I'll share it with you. I flogged a suit to a prime minister in circumstances that were funny enough for it to merit a newspaper story. And instead of a fee, I asked for shifts on the newspaper and yada, yada, yada. The rest is mediocrity. The rest is my career. And because I thought that ship had sailed, I was too grateful at the beginning of my career. My dad used to tell me off. I was too grateful. I often didn't claim my expenses and stuff like that. Like, yes, I'm a journalist. I've made it, finally. Whereas when I was flogging menswear, which is what I was doing when I was trying to get into journalism, I would have been much more of a clock watcher. I would have been a lot more of claiming every penny of overtime. And if they asked, could you pop and drop that suit off at the Savoy after work today? I'll say yes, but I mean, you'll have to pay me or I'll come in an hour late tomorrow. When I was a journalist, it was, I'd do anything. It's an interesting one, that. And I was wrong. You shouldn't. The employer it's a contract. And I guess that idea that you're a better employee if you do stuff that you're not being paid for, you go above and beyond, is another social stroke generational shift that's a big part of this story. Thank you, Nikki. Tina is in Scarborough. Tina, what can you tell me?
Well, I've got quite a story to tell. I think that after I had children, I was basically introduced as, this is Tina, I paid for her children. And this was to the great and the good. It didn't matter who came into the department. The fact that I had worked my whole life, paid all my credits, and that the institution I worked for claimed those credits back. meant they weren't really losing any money by me being on maternity leave, apart from the fact that I was excellent at my job.
So hang on, I just want to clarify. You took the payments you were entitled to, the parental leave you were entitled to. And when you came back to work, your boss would introduce you to people as he'd say, "I've paid for her childcare."
I paid for her children.
Well, he's a charmer.
What happened was, he was, unfortunately, I truly believe, somebody who felt that women should be at home.
Yes.
But then why employ me?
There's a lot of it about.
The other things that happened was every time a new job came along, I desperately tried to get away from him. He would conspire. And he was powerful enough within the institution that I could not get a job with anybody else. Now, I had to stay working there for particular reasons.
Sure. You got bills to pay.
Because I had bills to pay, and also because it's both for various reasons. And I was trapped. So, for example, a job came along that, I was great at my job, brilliant.
Of course.
Would have been the next step up. And for a long time, it was going my way, and I was told this by the great, the good, everybody in charge, etc. And I found out it was the job it was being interviewed for the next day. It turned out that the head of the department had gone to him and said, and obviously we'll ask Tina. And what happened was he said, "I've no interested in that position. She's already told me."
How do we know? And I hope you don't mind me asking this question. How do you know he had a problem with women as opposed to just having a problem with you?
I think it was me.
Oh, you do? You don't think it was women in general? Or you think it was?
No. I think he definitely had a generational problem, but I think there was something extra going on there. But imagine coming in and being introduced to people, and we met a lot of well-known people came into my office and being introduced as I paid for her children.
Yeah, no, that is pretty shocking, actually, and that is the thing historically that the workforce is forced to endure, isn't it? You need the job, or the inconvenience of finding a new job is too great, or even in some cases the impossibility, or you would have to take a pay cut, and you shouldn't have to deal with toxic management. And it is in much less evidence than it used to be. But I suspect for mothers returning to the workplace, it is probably the most exposed to toxic management than any other section of the workforce, as Tina has sadly experienced. 11:46 is the time. If you're struggling to get through, don't text to complain. Just grab the phone line as it's freed up. In this case, 03456060973. And we'll look a little further at this after these words. It's 10 to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation about mothers missing out on promotions continues. And staying on a similar theme, I think, after 12. I need your help with this, because it's one of those stories that is, once again, designed, obviously, to stoke up feelings. And I have it. Well, look, I won't tell you now. I'll take more calls on this, and then I'll give you a heads up after the news on what we're going to talk about next. Let's get back to Manchester. Sarah is there. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
first-time caller. I just wanted to share my experience. I've just pulled over in the car because I was shouting at the radio. So mine wasn't so much promotion. It was more trying just to keep the role that I was in. So yes. I worked really, really hard to get to kind of a director, quite a senior role. And when I fell pregnant, the kind of conversations were, well, are you coming back full time because we really want you back? And I was just a bit like, well, I'm not sure at the moment. And so it was kind of like, unless you come back full time, you need to kind of find another role or think about re-leveling if you want to go part time. And my boss at the time, he was just completely ruthless, to be fair. So I felt like I didn't have a choice really. So I went back full time, working kind of ridiculous hours and really missing out. And there was no one at my level that was working reduced hours, or, even if you wanted to go to a swimming thing, you'd get these awful looks when you left at 4:00 to say, oh, there she goes again, the part-timer, although I wasn't part-time. So it was just absolutely awful and a horrible time. But you just work so hard to get to these levels. You think, I can't give up now.
Yeah. So it was his way or the highway?
absolutely.
And then
and even talk.
I'm speaking in pure cliches now. It was his way for the highway, and then the next bit was in for a penny, in for a pound. You thought, well, I've done this now. I've made my bed. I'm going to have to lie in it.
Yeah. I was just too invested.
Yeah,
to
that's the
walk
word.
Away and then do something that I know I didn't deserve almost because I was better than that.
Yeah. So what happened? How did
it
transpire? What happened then?
Well, I did that. It took me 6 years to go again to have my second child. And this time I was working for a woman who was absolutely an inspirational leader. And I said to her, I sat down and said, look, I'm going to have another baby, so I'm probably not going to come back. And she was like, what do you mean? Why are you not going to come back to work? And I said, well, this role can't be done part-time, as I've learnt the hard way. So while I'm off for the year, I will find alternative work. And, I'm not going to miss out again and go through that, what I went through before with my first child. Like, it was just not going to happen. And she was just a bit confused. Like, she was like, we do this dynamic working, we've got this scheme and that scheme. And it was just so refreshing. And cut a long story short, while I was off, I managed to go onto this job share scheme that she introduced me to, where I met lots of other women that had young children. And I'm now in a job share 6 years in. And we both do 2.5 days each.
So, well, that's the future then.
Brilliant.
So that works for you. And your old job, could you have done that in your old job if you'd been in charge, if you didn't have this? See, we use ruthless almost like a compliment, don't we? Whereas really we just mean insensitive and crass. If you didn't have an insensitive and crass boss, could your old job have been turned into the kind of setup you've got now?
Yeah, I was still in that old job when I went back from the second maternity leave. Because she said it was possible.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Different schemes.
Oh, well, there you go. That
so
answers my question.
I went back at the same. Yeah, no, I
what
went
happened
back at
to
the
him?
Same level. I think he got made redundant in the end.
Well, couldn't happen to a nicer bloke. Sarah, many thanks indeed. Just down the road from Manchester in Stockport. Steph I was in Stockport the other day, Steph.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah, lovely part of the world. What's on your mind?
So I initially, when I went back to work after my first child, I was full-time. And my boss at the time would often make comments like about the other, because I'm a teacher, so the other teachers like, oh, they're off again, it's great for you, you're always here. But I had a really good childminder with like a network, so forever...
Makes a difference, doesn't it? In fact, I think mums and grandmas make a massive difference as well. But that's not the point.
But then
who's that?
I got pregnant. This is my second one here. He's eating. I'm keeping him quiet with food.
I thought that was his name. I thought you'd call him Eaton in honour of the Prime Minister.
No. So when I had to tell my boss that I was pregnant with my second one, and at this point I was sort of being primed to go for the head of early years role. So that would have been a big promotion for me.
Yes.
And I told him I was pregnant, and he sort of rolled his eyes and went, did you not go to sex education lessons?
Whoa.
Oh my God. I was like, I'll come back early, I'm going to come back full time. Sort of really desperately trying to be like, please don't be angry, I really want, the promotion.
I mean, that's out of order on all sorts of levels. Did he think he was being funny?
Yeah, he did.
Right. It's no excuse. I was just wondering whether he said it like a bully or whether he said it like a mistaken comedian.
No, it was very much like a mistaken comedian, but that was his attitude to everything, is I'm going to say things that are inappropriate and not okay, but I'm going to say it in this way, and then you'll never really know. Yeah,
of course. Oh, that's a great point. What happened then? How did it unfold?
Well, it ended in a couple of weeks after my son was born. My husband left. So I ended up being a single parent, and then I just couldn't afford to go back full time anyway. But it did mean just the pressures of being a single parent with two children.
I'm sorry. It's
probably for the best, but I couldn't then take on that promotion. It is too much. It's so hard being a working parent, let alone a working single parent. And that's without the cost. No,
absolutely it is. And I mean, crikey, so out of the frying pan into the fire in a way, having to do everything on your own. What an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. And actually, on that, the court system, when we were sort of going through the divorce and stuff, and I was sort of speaking to my solicitor about the maintenance payments and stuff, because they pay, like, obviously the CMS rate of maintenance, and I'm fortunate that I get that because he does work and he's not self-employed, so he can't hide his wage and whatnot. But when I was like, well, he can contribute to half the cost of childcare, it just wouldn't go through. He just said no.
Really?
And there was nothing anyone could do. Yeah, because it's not their responsibility. If I'm the resident carer, they don't. All their duty is to provide the legal required maintenance payment, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is an absolute drop in the ocean.
Well, just tell me. You presume a lot. Tell me how much it is.
For him, so he is on 40 grand a year, and he pays £280 a month.
Yeah, that's just not right, is it?
No, and that's quite a lot because he gets quite a good wage.
Sure, and then you have to deal with it. And you work do you work part time yourself at the moment?
And now, I've just gone back part time, but it wasn't even just the money. I'm so passionate about my job, and
which is precisely the sort of people we want teaching our children. And yet, not only does the system conspire against you, but also your head teacher sounds as if he doesn't want to prioritise your passion.
I relocated.
Good.
But actually, it's my job share. She's just come back from having her first child, and she's come back to find that the leadership role that she had has just been given to somebody else that works full time.
Yeah, okay. Well, that is my lesson this hour, has been that part-time, full-time thing, which I was just wrong about at the beginning. Felt, are you sure? Isn't it fair? Of course it's not. It's the part-time and full-time is the future. It's actually why some people are struggling to understand the terms and conditions and the working practices that GPs choose to employ. It is an old man's problem, and I speak as someone who is just on the cusp of being an old man. We can't quite understand how the world is turning, why things are changing. Well, I never saw my kids growing up. Why should anyone else see their kids growing up? It's ridiculous. It's not fair upon your kids or on you. So we seek to make a society in which people can be happier and more fulfilled. And you start probably with the relationship between work and life, and one of the most obvious places to start with that is the relationship between parenthood and work. But I would say, just as a glimmer of hope, things are a lot better than they were 15 years ago. It's 3 minutes after 12, and I think I'm going to change my mind about what we go into next, having had the conversation in the last hour. Because, listen, I'm not a hair shirt merchant or anything like that. I have written a book about the importance of changing your mind, but it doesn't mean I'm very good at it. It just means I'm conscious of the importance of it. And I caught myself a couple of times in the last hour talking about mothers returning to work and essentially being discriminated against. I fell into a couple of traps that I should, or I could perhaps have avoided, and I shall endeavour to avoid in the future. The first being that part-time, full-time dichotomy, and the simple fact that part-time work currently, as things stand, is a lot more likely to be undertaken by working mothers than working fathers. Therefore, it is part of the conversation, not a separate conversation. And also the simple fact that I'm a bloke, and therefore I don't think anyone looked at me differently when I became a parent. I don't think anybody in my professional world would have thought, oh, James is a dad now. We better give Keith that shift, or we better get someone else to. Do you see what I mean? Or we better discourage him from. You're never going to present the Great British Radio Show. You're a parent now. You're going to have to make do with a slightly less high-profile position. Or, well, I don't know. You see where I'm coming from. And I don't know whether or not the next story is completely linked, even maybe partly linked. I think it is. What I want you to do is something that you generally prove quite reluctant to do, but given that I'm so warm and welcoming these days, I think you'll do it today. I've got a couple of stories that are potentially provocative. Okay? It's what you might call, if the poor fella's TV station hadn't turned out so disastrously for him, it's probably the kind of thing that old Andrew Neil would have done in his, quotes, woke watch section on GBBs. Never quite sure what woke means in this modern context. I know, loosely speaking, it just means anti-racist or anti-bigotry, but I know lots of people who think that woke is a problem wouldn't like that description. So it two stories that I think could be offered up as evidence of wokeness. This is people who use the word as a pejorative. Same people, I think, and if you're one of them, then you are doubly welcome on the programme today. The same people who used to use the phrase political correctness or politically correct as a pejorative. And then when when we spoke with each other, I'd ask a couple of questions, and it turned out that what people usually meant by political correctness was just really good manners. So, you can't do that anymore, it's not politically correct. And I said, well, why would you want to do that? It's really rude to use that language to someone who doesn't like that. It's really rude to do that. And usually, and I wrote about this in my first book, actually, but usually with a little bit of, like, cooperation and collaboration, a little bit of conversation, we'd reach a place where we could both sort of go, oh, yeah, that's actually, maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. But so much effort, as ever, sort of turning into a stuck record, is put into encouraging us to bite chunks out of each other, that you end up thinking that, there's something wrong with politeness, which is, loosely speaking, all that political correctness ever was. It went too far. In reality, sometimes it went too far. But also, a lot of it was made up. My favourite example was probably Winterval, which was just the biggest load of nonsense. The idea that Birmingham Council had banned Christmas and replaced it with Winterval because it didn't want to offend non-Christians was categorically untrue. But it was written everywhere from the Daily Telegraph up. And and it still is. You'll still hear that story out there occasionally. Boris Johnson, in his speech last week, spoke about sports days where nobody wins a race. That's been a sort of hardy perennial of performative ignorance since I started doing this job on LBC. It's a fairly straightforward idea that when you're younger, as you get older, of course, competitive sport becomes more important. But when you're young, when you're 8 years old, you want everybody to enjoy themselves. And the best way of doing that is not to turn sports day into an event that 3 kids enjoy and 30-odd other kids don't enjoy. It's all very straightforward, but of course that invitation to get cross is often irresistible. So there are 2 stories here, and the question I'm going to ask you is, what am I missing? So I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle from usual. I'm thinking these are quite significant changes. I don't see any problem at all with them, but maybe I'm at fault. I think that would be more useful than me trying to explain why you're at fault. So they're both stories about change, social change, and they both speak to gender issues, and they both leave me mildly encouraged. One of them I'm more or less ambivalent about. The other one I'm quite encouraged by. So you marry those 2 together, and I'm mildly encouraged by these 2 stories. I think, oh yeah, not a massive deal. And you may, of course, come at it from that angle and tell me why it is a massive deal. Not a massive deal, but generally for the better. Whereas you think that this is a problem and something that shouldn't happen, or something that, I should be a little bit more wary of. And I want you to tell me why. I want you to tell me what it is that is worrying about these 2 stories. The first is that British Airways has told pilots and cabin crew not to refer to passengers as ladies and gentlemen. Okay? I'd rather not go into too much detail on these 2 stories. I'd quite like to get going on it early rather than inflict my pontifications on you, because I've told you what I think, and I don't think that is a bad thing. I'm largely ambivalent about that. I don't really, perhaps because I'm a bloke, I don't really find myself thinking, God, about time too. Ladies and gentlemen is a ludicrous, anachronistic nomenclature that we should be rid of as soon as is humanly possible. I just find myself thinking, yeah, fair enough. Always left the kids feeling a little bit left out. So some people will get upset about that. And what am I missing? British Airways has told pilots and cabin crew not to refer to passengers as ladies and gentlemen in a bid to be inclusive. And I say, yeah, okay, fair enough. What do you think the problem is with that story? 0345 6060973. And the second one, which I think might be easier to get our teeth into. This is really interesting to me. Shops in California have been told they are to be forced to have at least one aisle in the toy department. Regular listeners are waiting for my Kidderminster story at this point, but I won't be inflicting it upon you again today. They must have at least one aisle which is gender neutral. Now, this means that a reasonable selection of items must be on display regardless of whether they have been traditionally marketed for either girls or for boys. And I really like that story. It applies to toys and childcare items, which will include hygiene and teething products. It won't be imposed upon stores with fewer than 500 employees because of issues of scale. And the traditional boys and girls sections will still be in place. But I guess the fact that it's a law is what draws our eye to this story. Stores will be forced or ordered or compelled, whatever verb you prefer, to have one aisle in the toy department that will be gender neutral. Now, how does that word reach your ears, that phrase, gender neutral? Have you got a problem with that already? Because I just want to know why. I suspect I'll get quite a few texts on this, but I do want to get... Here's one from Carl. He says, read the BA story, utterly, and then at various asterisks, ridiculous. And I just want to know why, Carl. I don't want to have a row. I just want to know, it seems to me to be an almost entirely innocuous story. So British Airways is now going to say passengers or customers or whatever it may be. It's not going to say ladies and gentlemen. And I don't know, maybe you're exaggerating your response, but why is that a problem for anybody? 0345 6060973. And then we'll move it to the children. And on this one, I'm as interested in stories as I am in opinions. And it comes alongside some fascinating research that's been conducted into spatial toys. If you take a child, and when they're really young, you can't tell whether they're boys or girls, can you? You generally make a punt, you take a guess at gender based upon what they're wearing. And that's increasingly difficult these days as well. Or when they get a tiny bit older and their hair has grown long or something. So these are old labels that are obviously arbitrary, but this is the world we inhabit. If you put a baby in clothes that are masculine and then give that baby to another adult and give them a toy box, they will reach for the toys that are more spatially aware. And this is us. This is the grown-ups doing this without realising it. This is social conditioning. We will reach for the toys that are more spatially aware, and that engenders more typically masculine traits. It creates a culture of boys who feel conditioned. This is research at Aston University by a neuroscientist called Gina Rippon to adopt these traits. So Tetris, for example, is spatially aware, and it's why when you get to school, there become differences in how you perform at mathematics. The idea that some toys are for boys and some toys are for girls, and this is where I do see the potential for debate, is, I'm going to use the word unhealthy. Okay? And I want to hear from you about your experiences. 0345 6060973 on either rejecting that idea, rejecting the suggestion that the idea of having toys that are specifically for boys and toys that are specifically for girls is unhealthy. Tell me why it isn't unhealthy on 0345 6060973. And just as interestingly, perhaps, hopefully, I'd love to hear about what happens. And I want this to cover all ages. So if your little baby